Chapter 4. The Rots in the Walls, Part 2. The Doctor and Romana finally arrived in front of the heavy wooden door of Corridor 2, Room 23. The journey had been surprisingly far from straightforward, given the relatively simple geometry of the quadrangle. They had traversed many other corridors, climbed many stairs, descended them again, and turned a multitude of corners. But finally they had arrived, and Romana had licked nary a creature, nor artifact, nor person en route, which the Doctor considered a small victory. Each door had something of the appearance of an external door, given they all sported a large brass ring knocker. This room was no exception, and so the Doctor thumped it 3 times heavily against the wood. "Enter!" came the voice of the day speaker, muffled by the door. The Doctor turned the bulky brass door handle, and he and Romana complied. The day speaker, Jeanne, was seated behind an antique wooden desk in a high-backed leather armchair. Upon the desk sat a modest sign saying, "Speaker Jeanne Bayer." Jeanne had removed her white fur cloak, but was otherwise dressed as before in smart butcher's attire. The room itself was decorated in a style in keeping with the ancient air of the building. A couple of old bookcases, complete with leather-bound volumes of various sizes and shapes. A couple of more modest chairs on this side of the desk for visitors. 2 doors leading to other adjoining rooms, probably a small bedroom and bathroom, the Time Lords surmised. Everything had a rather well-worn appearance. Jeanne smiled broadly at her guests. "Ah, I was hoping it would be you. Please have a seat," she said, gesturing towards the 2 empty chairs. The Doctor and Romana both nodded politely and took their seats. "So," Jeanne began, "what brings 2 such illustrious and exotic off-world travellers to the Mondasian Parliament of all places?" The Doctor made his best effort to return her friendly smile. "To be honest, we are in need of certain supplies for our ship," he said, a little cagily. "But I was also hoping to ask you a few questions about this fascinating place, both the building and the people." Jeanne spread her arms wide. "Naturally. Ask away. I would be pleased to help you in any way I can. And who knows, we might discover something which is to our mutual benefit." "Who knows?" Romana agreed. The Doctor nodded once. "Firstly, I am most curious about yourself," the Doctor began. "You are the Speaker of the Day Parliament, are you not?" Jeanne nodded. "So I imagine that must make you one of the most, if not the most powerful people on Mondas." Jeanne chuckled ruefully. "If only that was so. No, the Speaker's role is simply a referee, calling Parliament to order and reminding them of the rules. But my own power is minuscule, barely extending any further than my voice. I'm not even the most powerful in my caucus, the Provisioners' Caucus, not even the most powerful in my guild, the Butchers' Guild. Once upon a time my family held that honor, but no more. The rotund Nornard Burfolk now holds that esteemed position. No, I must confess that while modestly successful in business, there are many others here with far greater political clout than I." The day speaker looked apologetic as she finished her tale. The Doctor inclined his head in understanding, then lightly said, "So, to what exactly was this Seaman fellow referring, and who is he?" Jeanne looked crestfallen. "Seaman Brunson is the head of the Technical Caucus of Mondas. They comprise all the technological manufacturing and design guilds. As you could see, Seaman himself is part of the Electricians' Guild. As leader of the most powerful caucus, Seaman is the de facto Prime Minister of the Mondasian Parliament. He is the most powerful politician on Mondas right now." "And his jibe about recapturing past glories?" Romana interjected. Jeanne sighed. "He speaks of the time before the formation of the parliaments of Mondas, the times when the mayors of Mondas ruled the planet, and for centuries the mayors came from the Butchers' Guild." Jeanne now looked alternately into the eyes of Romana and the doctor. "Then came the years of the 3 tyrants," she said with bitter sorrow. The doctor seemed to shift uncomfortably in his seat, and Romana looked at him curiously. She could not ascertain any obvious cause for his fidgeting, and so returned to questioning the day speaker. "The 3 tyrants? Who were they?" "They appeared about 150 years ago, and although their reign was brief, it was violent and chaotic, and much of the records of the time were lost forever in the upheavals. It seems the mayor of Mondas at the time was suddenly possessed by 3 entities. 1 mayor but 3 bodies, 1 name yet 3 owners, and yet it was murmured that these 3 tyrants shared another name, one which all feared to speak, a forgotten name of power, of terror." The doctor coughed uncomfortably. Yes, it sounds truly awful. But it all turned out all right in the end? Yes?" he asked hastily. "Turned out all right in the end?" Jeanne repeated incredulously. "Eventually the people revolted. In the fighting, thousands died. But in the aftermath, the Mondasian parliaments were established. An improvement, yes. But the power of the Butchers' Guild was neutered. Never again would it match that held before the arrival of the 3 tyrants." The doctor coughed uncomfortably once more, but otherwise remained silent. Romana was again perplexed, and sought to fill the growing void in the conversation. "Anyway, perhaps you could explain to me why there is a day and a night parliament?" she asked politely. Jeanne's surprise was writ large across her face. "You must come from a very distant world if you have never heard of the twin parliaments of Mondas." Romana shrugged apologetically. "Very well. Put simply, the day parliament deals with all the rules, regulations, and laws of daily life, the reputable businesses and trades, the people who work in them, the lawful," Jeanne explained. Now her tone darkened. "Then there is the night parliament. They deal with their own kind, the criminals, dealers, muggers, streetwalkers, assassins, murderers, and worse." Romana looked aghast. "The criminals set their own rules? They decide what is right and wrong for them?" Jeanne laughed bitterly. "Hardly. When they break the laws of the day parliament, they are caught and punished. But it cannot be denied that there is much that they control. They have a power of their own which would be costly to cross or to try and bring down. So they are allowed to manage their own business and administer their own laws. And occasionally, when there is overlapping interests, bills might pass between parliaments to be ratified by both. But this is rare. However, in the spirit of cooperation, balance is maintained." "Balance," Romana muttered skeptically. "I see." The doctor chose this moment to break his silence. "This building, the Parliament chamber and these wings, they seem far older than 150 years. Jeanne nodded noncommittally. "Well, yes, I believe they were repurposed from a monastery which fell into disuse centuries ago. But more than that I could not tell you." The doctor looked disappointed. "Ah, I see. But, my friends," Jeanne now said briskly, leaning across the desk, clasping her hands together, "you spoke earlier of needing supplies for your ship. I am sure that I can be of service for any of your provisioning needs. We are in need of validium, and had heard Mondas might be a source of it," the doctor asked casually. Jeanne slumped back in her chair dejectedly. "I fear neither I, nor probably anyone else on the planet will be able to help you." "How so?" Romana asked. "We understood your ships are powered by this material." "All 5 of them are," Jeanne agreed wearily. "And all 5 are currently off-world, primarily looking for validium. Validium is not native to this world. In terms of interstellar trade, we are like beggars at the table, at the mercy of the larger players, such as the mining consortium or the growing feudal Levithian empire. It is one of the reasons our planet, our culture, might strike one as a little unstable, chaotic, backward even. It is so much easier to be civilized with a full purse." These last words were delivered by Jeanne with a mixture of bitterness and apology. "Yes, I can see how some could come to think that, depending upon their measures of civilization," the doctor offered cryptically. "I am sorry I cannot be of more help," Jeanne said in a more brisk tone, clearly seeking to wind up their discussion. "I was hoping your supply needs might be more in line with my own areas of expertise, livestock and their processed products. But I can see you are in search of less palatable produce." The doctor held up a hand. No, not necessarily. I mean, once we have a means to get underway, a hold full of fine salamis might well make our visit here all the more worthwhile. Once we get underway, that is. The day speaker brightened a little. Then we may well speak more of this, Jian said hopefully. Of course, but who might we speak to in order to find more validium, remote though our chances might be of obtaining some? The doctor asked. By this time, Romana was looking between the doctor and Jian with obvious impatience. For the time being, however, she remained silent. Meanwhile, Jian's weariness had returned. Oh, well, I suppose Seaman would be your most likely source of information. He is the most connected in the technical and manufacturing world, after all. And where might we find him? Romana interjected hurriedly, with forced politeness. Jian looked ruffled, but remained helpful. Well, he did make a big show of announcing he was going to research price-fixing in the Quadrangle Library. It's on the upper floor of the North Wing. He does like to make it well known just how hard he is apparently working, she said, unable to hide a shade of bitterness. The doctor stood up sharply. Excellent. Well then, for now we shall bid you adieu. But I'm sure we shall speak again, he announced loudly, thrusting his hand towards Jian. The day speaker looked a little taken aback, but took his hand nonetheless and shook it. Romana took her hand swiftly after and repeated the action, before both Time Lords exited quickly into the corridor, shutting the door firmly behind them. Romana rounded on the doctor. What was all that about? She demanded angrily. All what? The doctor replied haughtily. All that nonsense about validium and salami. I was pumping her for information which may well get us out of this mess. Romana threw up her hands in frustration. But we already have the coordinates of some validium. Plus, it is of no use to us here if we cannot get the ship free. Quite so, Romana. The validium and the salami were merely pretexts in order to move the conversation, not the TARDIS. To free the TARDIS, we need to understand what is happening to the building. That, this building and its history, is what I really wanted to learn about. I feel it is that which will unravel this mystery. That, and how it is connected to the furry friend you made earlier. Romana looked unconvinced, and so the doctor continued. Unfortunately, the day speaker appeared to have very little information on that score. But now we have an introduction, an excuse, to talk to another powerful occupant of this place. Shall we see what he has to say? Romana sighed, but nodded her agreement. Why not? She said wearily. What have we got to lose? As they began to walk the corridor once more, Romana added, except time. Given the North Wing was attached directly to the East Wing, the Time Lords elected to remain inside the building and simply trace the main corridors and stairs to their destination. As they walked, Romana struck up another seemingly idle conversation. So, who were these three tyrants? She asked innocently. The doctor stopped abruptly and started looking around the corridor distractedly, left and right, up and down, anywhere in fact, other than directly at Romana. Well, I'm sure I don't know anything more than we have just learned. A brief period of political strife and social unrest on a planet well accustomed to such things. I'm sure these three tyrants could not have been very consequential. In the grander scheme of things, I mean. Romana narrowed her eyes at the doctor. Doctor, when were you last here? She asked accusingly. The doctor licked his right index finger and held it up as if feeling for a breeze, his eyes turned towards the ceiling. Just over 150 years ago. Romana nodded slowly. And did you by any chance meet these three tyrants? The doctor continued to look about wildly. I met the mayor at the time, he conceded hurriedly, but I can assure you he was but one man. I can't remember ever getting his name. I think I only ever called him mayor. I saw absolutely no signs of three tyrants running the show. It all must have happened after I left. Romana nodded again. Uh-huh. Strange you didn't stick around. You usually have a knack for stumbling onto, or rather into potential trouble, and then inevitably sticking your oar in. What happened this time, I wonder? The doctor brushed the thinly veiled criticism aside. Obviously, this wasn't that important. On a universal scale, I mean. Petty politics stuff. Insufficient to make my nose twitch, he said with a wave of his hand. Romana shrugged. I suppose so, she said simply. The doctor suddenly pointed down the corridor. It's this way, he declared confidently. At last they arrived outside the doors of the library. The doors were thick and heavy and bore a friendly sign which read, "Please keep closed at all times." The doctor was reaching for the door handle when Romana gripped his arm. "Wait, doctor, listen." The doctor paused, and together they stood stock still, straining to hear any sounds besides the rush of blood in their ears. For a moment, it sounded like there might be a scratching, scuttling sound beyond the door. Quickly, though, silence reigned once more, and neither Time Lord could be certain what, if anything, they had heard. "Did you hear that?" Romana asked, clearly unsure of her own senses. "I don't know," the doctor replied, frowning. "I suppose we'd better take a look." Romana appeared less than impressed by this idea, but nevertheless did nothing to prevent the doctor opening the door. Slowly and cautiously they entered, politely closing the door behind them. Stack upon stack of shelves led off into the sizable room before them, which occupied the whole of this floor of the north wing. The stacks reached up towards the ceiling, a towering cathedral of literature. Between the rows, one or two gantry-like wheeled iron steps could be seen, allowing visitors access to tomes on the upper ranks. From where the Time Lord stood near the door, they could see no sign of Seaman Brunson. The doctor beckoned Romana to follow him deeper into the library. Walking now between the stacks, the sparsity of illumination had far more immediate impact, as all about them became gloomy shadows cast at weird angles. "How is anyone supposed to read in here?" Romana grumbled at the doctor. "Shh!" he hissed at her, one finger upon his lips, another pointing to a small sign attached to the nearest shelf. It simply read, "Silence." Romana rolled her eyes. Then she gasped and prodded the doctor, pointing ahead of them, between the wooden racks. In the dim light, it was just possible to make out a pair of boots. They were poking out from one of the regularly spaced gaps, allowing transit from one row of shelves to the next. Romana and the doctor rushed over to them, a rising sense of foreboding gripping them both. Lying on the floor was Seaman Brunson. While he was still twitching slightly, it was clear he was quite dead. He was unbreathing, his body contorted as if every muscle had been tensed beyond their limits. His face was a rictus grin of pure animal terror. Both his hands, rendered talon-like in death, were soaked in blood and gore, but were, like the rest of his body, not themselves bleeding or cut. However, where once Seaman had had eyes, there now lay two bloody pits. Seaman had clawed his own eyes out. Romana's face was contorted in disgust, but she did not flinch from the sight and said, "Dear God, what happened to him?" The doctor glanced sideways at her. "I thought we had no need for them." Romana looked puzzled and disturbed. "For what?" she asked with trepidation. "Gods," the doctor replied with a humorless smile. "Let's just say I'm beginning to see their ways, their wonders to perform," Romana conceded grimly, nodding towards the corpse. The doctor now bent down beside the body and picked up a small object from the floor, where it had been partially hidden by the folds of Seaman's jacket. The doctor held it up, bringing it close to his eye to examine it carefully. It was roughly spherical, about the size of a horse chestnut, and appeared to be made out of brass, or at least an alloy of similar color. The brass surface itself was etched with deep lines, which might be the letters of some ancient language, or otherwise channels and conduits necessary to its function, whatever that may be. "What is it?" Romana asked. "Well, I would say it is a device of some kind." "Probably. Could you possibly be more vague?" The doctor squinted at Romana peevishly. He took out the sonic screwdriver and scanned the object for a second. Whatever it is, it had a power source, but it seems utterly drained. We'd best study it in more detail later, perhaps back in the TARDIS," he said, pocketing both the brass device and the screwdriver. Romana made to speak, to offer her opinion of his plans when her action was cut short by an odd sound. It sounded for all the world like a game of marbles. At that moment, another small brass sphere rolled from between the stacks to come to rest just in front of them. Romana and the doctor looked at each other and backed away a couple of steps. The device did nothing. Then a faint noise came to them. At first it was so quiet, so indistinct it was impossible to describe. Then gradually it became a rustling, but from where it was as yet unclear. The volume continued to grow, now a chorus of scratching, scrabbling, and scraping, and it came from everywhere. With horror, the doctor and Romana both realized the noise was coming from within the walls themselves. All the walls. They looked at each other, wordlessly understanding their peril, and as one began to dash back towards the doors. Barely had they taken 2 steps when the horror spilled forth. From every wall a torrent of rats washed down and outwards. They seemed to flow like oil from the bricks, plaster and wood panelling itself, not from rat-sized holes, but seemingly to ooze from every crack, every tiny flaw in every surface. How they managed to flow so was as unclear as it was inconceivable, but still they came. The library was filling with gibbering, giggling, screeching black bodies. They ran down the walls and across the floor, converging on Romana and the doctor. Both looked desperately for some means of escape, but it was hopeless. They were surrounded. "Quick, up here!" the doctor cried, pointing to one set of metal steps nearby, set against the side of the nearest bookshelf. Romana went first, the doctor following. Barely had his feet left the floor than there was no more floor. All was now a tumbling, boiling mass of moving bodies, their squeaking and laughing sickeningly childlike. The level of the black mass was rising rapidly, almost lapping at the doctor's heels, as the 2 Time Lords climbed with careless haste to the top platform of the ladder. Here they paused, clutching each other to retain their balance. The ladder was rickety at the best of times, but now it was being buffeted by countless unnatural forms, making it jerk and vibrate unpredictably. The doctor and Romana eyed the still rising tide of churning black warily. "Well, I think we've found what's keeping the TARDIS here," the doctor observed. "How do you mean?" Romana asked nervously. "Well, such a large concentration of creatures of the bulk, or at least connected to the bulk, to judge from your earlier encounter, would certainly accelerate the dissolving of our space-time. Whatever caused them to be pulled here has also allowed them to pull here back into their realm, crumbling into the bulk, so to speak." Romana shuddered. "So we need to defeat these creatures of the bulk, who have invaded our fragment of the universe." The doctor stared into Romana's eyes with fearsome intensity, an effect amplified by their forced proximity. "The creatures of the bulk cannot be defeated," the doctor stated with earnest gravity. "Their very concept of life, of existence, is utterly beyond our comprehension. Even death to them may have no permanence, or even equivalent state. We cannot destroy or defeat them." Romana shook her head. "Such power, such unbounded reality. What hope have we here as mere mortals in our 4-dimensional plane?" she said distractedly. The doctor clapped her shoulders. "Come now, Romana. There's always hope," he declared with somewhat forced cheerfulness. At that moment Romana's eyes rolled up briefly, and it seemed she was starting to faint, forcing the doctor to clutch her close to prevent her tumbling into the sea of rats, to lose her mind and life forever. One of the rats had brushed against Romana's heel for the merest fraction of a second. Romana shook herself and regained her focus. "It's okay, I'm okay," she said with some impatience, but clearly shaken. "Not for long if we stay here," the doctor said. Then he pointed to the ceiling above the bookshelf. "Look, a hatch! Quickly, climb the shelves!" Frantically, they pulled books free and dropped them to be lost below, creating hand and footholds to aid them as they scaled the top few feet of the shelves. Fortunately, the shelves were topped with a flat wooden panel and were utterly free from such obstructions. Once again, the doctor and Romana stood teetering on their new temporary vantage point, gripping one another for balance and security. They looked up at the hatch above them and realized, with horror, it was out of reach. Even with one on the shoulders of the other, they would fall short and be unable to push it open. "What do we do now?" Romana asked, exasperated. "I'm thinking," the doctor replied. Romana tried another tack. "If we do make it out of here, how are we ever going to free the TARDIS? I mean, if these bulk rats cannot be destroyed?" The doctor brightened. "Oh, that's relatively easy," he said cheerfully. "Easy!" Romana cried incredulously. "Pray tell this simple way we can dispatch these multi-dimensional god creatures. All we have to do is persuade them to leave." Romana rolled her eyes. The doctor grabbed her close, thinking she was about to faint again. Romana pushed him away a little in irritation, making it plain she was fine. "As simple as that, eh?" she said with prickly sarcasm. The doctor nodded, grinning. "Oh, yes. If we can persuade them to disperse, then their destabilizing influence will become diluted and ineffectual. Indeed, as the damage to our fragment repairs itself, they would likely just seep back into the bulk. Over time. Romana looked thoughtful. I suppose we could set fire to the buildings, then hide in the TARDIS until the flames have subsided, or until the rats have dispersed enough for us to get underway. The doctor looked at Romana disapprovingly. So we have progressed from licking things to pyromania? Fire is not always the answer. Even if we just gloss over the danger to anyone not hiding in the TARDIS, maybe such a thorough dose of fire starting might not be so easily managed or practical. Let's just put that idea on the back burner, if you'll pardon the pun. Ha! Romana retorted humorlessly. She then pointed behind the doctor. He turned his head to look over his shoulder. Sitting on the edge of the bookcase was a single black rat. Looking around them, it was clear that the general level of the rats was almost up to their own. Have you thought of a plan for our more immediate problem? Romana asked quietly. The doctor nodded. And, in answer, the doctor looked up towards the hatch and yelled, "Help!" Romana looked horrified, but the doctor merely gestured encouragingly with his hand. Romana sighed. "Help!" they both shouted together. Beyond the dying echoes of their cries and the ever-present cacophony of the rat horde, nothing else could be heard. No response. The single rat on the bookcase watched them intently, giggling gently to itself. "Help!" they cried again desperately. The rat took a step towards them.
Masters, mistresses, the Doctor requires materials in order to maintain the TARDIS and ensure continued functionality. He similarly requires carbon-based comestibles to sustain his own biological functions and existence. Master would never say this, but he requires aid beyond that supplied by this unit in order to acquire these. To aid the Doctor in his various tasks and creations, this can be most effectively achieved via Patreon or Substack subscriptions, or through donations directly to PayPal. Or if you desire physical goods in return for your contributions, written accounts of my travels with the Doctor are also available on Amazon. Links are in the description below. Thank you, Masters, mistresses.